In the bustling city of Boston, there lived a girl named Sarah who shared an unbreakable bond with her father, Michael. Having lost her mother during childbirth, Sarah had grown up under the devoted care of her father, a respected professor at a local university. For 18 years, they were each other's whole world, sharing weekend brunches, long walks in the public garden, and countless evenings discussing books and dreams. Michael had dedicated his life to giving Sarah everything she could ever need. Their townhouse was filled with warmth, laughter, and the kind of love that made others envious. Sarah couldn't imagine a life where she wasn't the center of her father's universe, and he had never given her reason to think otherwise. When Sarah received her acceptance letter to Stanford University, her heart was torn. The prestigious opportunity meant moving across the country, thousands of miles from the only parent she'd ever known. Michael, despite his own heavy heart, encouraged her to spread her wings. "Your future is the greatest gift I can give you," he told her, his eyes gleaming with pride. "And I promise to visit so often you'll get sick of me." Sarah knew her father never broke his promises. With that assurance, she embarked on her college journey. The California sun and new friendships helped ease her homesickness, and weekly video calls with her father became her anchor. But when Sarah returned home for Thanksgiving break, her world tilted on its axis. As she walked through their familiar front door, she was greeted not by her father's usual bear hug, but by an elegant woman with kind eyes. "I'm Rachel," the woman said warmly. "Your father's told me so much about you." Sarah's heart stopped. Before she could process this information, her father appeared, beaming with joy as he introduced Rachel as someone special in his life. Sarah plastered on her best smile, but inside, a storm was brewing. The sacred space she shared with her father felt invaded, their perfect duo transformed into an unwelcome trio. For the next few days, Sarah maintained a facade of acceptance. She joined Rachel and her father for dinner, laughed at their jokes, and pretended to be interested in Rachel's stories about her work as a pediatrician. Rachel, believing she was making progress with her boyfriend's daughter, let her guard down completely. But Sarah had other plans. One morning, while Rachel was preparing her father's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, Sarah set her plan in motion. She engaged Rachel in conversation about her relationship with Michael, watching as the woman's face lit up, talking about their first date at a jazz club, their shared love of classic films, and how Michael's dedication to Sarah had made her fall even harder for him. Sarah excused herself, her smile never wavering. But in her heart, jealousy had twisted into something darker. Later that day, she carefully planted her father's prized possession, his grandfather's vintage watch, in Rachel's overnight bag. The confrontation that followed was exactly what Sarah had orchestrated. Her father, devastated by the apparent theft of his family heirloom, asked Rachel to leave despite her tearful protest of innocence. Sarah played the role of the supportive daughter perfectly, even pretending to defend Rachel while knowing her words would fall on deaf ears. Rachel left that day, her reputation in tatters, her relationship destroyed. Sarah had won, her father was hers alone again. The following months returned to their familiar rhythm, just father and daughter against the world. But victory felt hollow. Sarah began to notice the sadness in her father's eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. The jazz music he'd started playing again after meeting Rachel fell silent. Their weekend brunches, once filled with animated conversation, grew quiet. One evening, Sarah found her father sitting alone in his study, holding a photo of her mother. "Your mother would have wanted me to be happy," he said softly, not looking up. "And she would have wanted you to be happy too, truly happy, not just comfortable." The weight of her actions crashed down on Sarah. In her desperate attempt to keep her father's love all to herself, she had dimmed the light in his eyes. She realized that love multiplies, it doesn't divide, and in trying to protect her share, she had only succeeded in reducing the total amount of love in their lives. That night, Sarah lay awake, haunted by the memory of Rachel's tears and her father's quiet grief. She had won the battle, but at what cost? The perfect world she thought she was protecting had been perfect not because it was exclusive, but because it was built on love, trust, and truth, all the things she had betrayed in her jealousy. The next morning, Sarah made the hardest decision of her life. She confessed everything to her father. The hurt in his eyes was almost unbearable, but beneath it was something else: relief at finally understanding the truth, and hope for healing. It took time to rebuild trust, and even longer to track down Rachel and make amends. But through this painful journey, Sarah learned that the capacity of the heart to love is infinite, and that true love only grows stronger when shared. Years later, at Sarah's graduation, she stood between her father and Rachel, now her stepmother, and finally understood that family isn't about possession or exclusivity. It's about having enough courage to let love grow in whatever direction it needs to flourish. But the story didn't end there. As winter turned to spring, loneliness began creeping back into Michael's life. Despite his daughter's constant presence, he yearned for adult companionship. Then he met Catherine, a successful business consultant whose gentle demeanor and quick wit caught his attention immediately. When Michael introduced Catherine to Sarah, his daughter greeted her with the same practiced warmth she'd shown before. But this time, something was different. Catherine's kind eyes held a wisdom that made Sarah slightly uneasy. Catherine began spending more time at their home, and Sarah played her part perfectly, cooking elaborate meals, engaging in long conversations about Michael's achievements, and sharing childhood stories. Catherine's friends congratulated her on winning over her boyfriend's daughter so quickly. If only they knew the storm brewing beneath Sarah's peaceful facade. One night, while Catherine slept, Sarah crept into her room. This time, her plan was more calculated, more cruel. She took one of Catherine's expensive silk scarves and carefully soaked it in a mixture she'd created from spoiled milk and vinegar, making sure the smell wouldn't be noticeable until the next day. She planted the scarf in her father's private study, knowing his obsession with cleanliness would do the rest. The next morning, the confrontation exploded exactly as Sarah had planned. Michael discovered the scarf, its now putrid smell filling his study. His face contorted with disgust as he confronted Catherine. "How could you be so disrespectful?" he demanded, holding out the scarf at arm's length. Catherine's confusion quickly turned to horror as the smell hit her. "Michael, that's not. I would never." But Michael's mind was made up. His pristine home, his ordered world, had been violated. Despite Catherine's tears and protests, he asked her to leave, unable to believe her claims of innocence. Sarah watched from the doorway, playing the role of concerned daughter perfectly. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she whispered, hiding her triumph behind a mask of sympathy. Months passed, and Sarah thought she had won again. But life had other plans. During a routine haircut, Michael met Elena, and she was unlike anyone he'd dated before. A corporate lawyer with sharp wit and sharper intuition, Elena carried herself with a quiet confidence that drew Michael in immediately. When they met, Elena and Sarah exchanged pleasant smiles, but in that brief moment, something passed between them. Elena's dark eyes seemed to pierce right through Sarah's carefully constructed facade. It was as if she could read every scheme, every manipulation that Sarah had orchestrated. "I've heard so much about you, Sarah," Elena said warmly, but there was something in her tone, a subtle warning perhaps, that made Sarah realize this woman would not be as easy to fool as the others. As Sarah watched Elena interact with her father over the following weeks, she began to feel uneasy. Elena noticed everything: the way Sarah's smile never quite reached her eyes, how she always positioned herself between Elena and Michael, the subtle ways she tried to undermine their conversations. For the first time, Sarah found herself facing an opponent who might be capable of seeing through her schemes. But more than that, Elena's presence forced Sarah to confront an uncomfortable truth: her father's happiness seemed fuller, more genuine, than it had been in years. Sarah's mind raced with potential plots and plans, but each time she looked at her father's smiling face, she remembered the pain she'd caused before. The weight of her past actions pressed heavily on her conscience, and she found herself at a crossroads: continue her pattern of destruction, or finally face the truth about herself and her father's right to happiness. As Sarah's desperation grew, she devised her most elaborate plan yet. Late one night, she crept into her father's study and planted what looked like evidence of dark practices: a vintage wooden box filled with mysterious items and her father's photograph, arranged to cast suspicion on Elena. But Elena was always one step ahead. While Sarah waited for her scheme to unfold, her father burst into her room, his face a mask of disappointment. But it wasn't Elena he was angry with, it was Sarah. "Is this what Stanford taught you?" he demanded, holding up his phone. On the screen was a photo of Sarah at a nightclub, drink in hand, dancing inappropriately with strangers. Sarah's face burned with shame as she recognized herself in the compromising image. Her careful facade of perfection crumbled in an instant. Confused and humiliated, Sarah rushed to her father's study, only to find the wooden box she'd planted was gone. As she stood there, processing her failed plan, Elena appeared in the doorway. "Are you okay, Sarah?" Elena's voice was gentle, genuine concern evident in her tone. Sarah whirled around, her composure cracking. "Why do you even care?" she spat, years of jealousy and resentment bubbling to the surface. Elena remained calm, her presence steady and unshaken. "Because I care about your father, and that means I care about you too. I can see you're struggling with something. If you'll let me, I'd like to help." "Help?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "After what you just did? You have the audacity to stand here pretending to be kind. Just wait, my father will see who you really are." Elena didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she simply nodded and quietly left the room, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. Hours later, still fuming, Sarah paced her room, trying to understand how her perfect plan had backfired so spectacularly. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Elena again, but this time she carried a small box. Inside was every piece of evidence of Sarah's previous schemes: the planted items, the doctored photographs, even security camera footage showing Sarah sneaking around at night. Did you enjoy this story? This was just the beginning. The second part is coming soon, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. What do you think will happen next? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd also love to know where in the world are you watching from. Your support means everything to us. If you're enjoying our stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Your comments and likes motivate us to bring you more amazing stories. And if you know someone who would love this story, send it to them and let's build a community that appreciates great storytelling. Thank you for being part of our journey, and stay tuned for the next thrilling chapter. This version keeps the engagement high while extending the message naturally. Let me know if you want any changes.